Welcome to Behind the Pages, Animal Law Insights from our newsletter authors. I'm Professor Joan Schaffner. I'm at the George Washington University Law School, and I'm also the Animal Law Committee newsletter editor. I am excited to moderate this panel today featuring the authors of our Winter-Spring 2025 issue that celebrated the 20th anniversary of the ABA Tips Animal Law Committee newsletter. The authors will briefly discuss their articles, and then we will end with questions. Please place your questions in the Q&A, and we will get to as many as we can. This program is being recorded. It will be placed on the ALC Committee YouTube channel, and you will also receive a link to the recording later this week. So let me introduce our fabulous author presenters for today. First up is Daria Bednarczyk. She is a recent graduate of the Vermont Law and Graduate School and will be discussing factory farming and aquaculture's threats to a sustainable future. Then Vanessa Krantz, who is also a recent graduate of Vermont Law and Graduate School, will present on animal law's expanding role in legal education. We'll then turn to David Favor, the Nancy Heathcote Professor of Property and Animal Law at Michigan State University College of Law, who will explore animals as living property. And then Nancy Blaney, who is the Director of Government Affairs at the Animal Welfare Institute, will speak on animals in research and when a lab animal is not deemed an animal. Then Courtney McVeigh, an attorney in Durango, Colorado, with an LLM in animal law from Lewis and Clark Law School, will present on wolf reintroduction in Colorado. And we will end with Holly Spainauer, an attorney and animal advocate who most recently served as a law scholar for change at Mercy for Animals, will survey some of the Animal Law Committee's policy work, highlighting a variety of ABA resolutions passed by the ABA House of Delegates. So with that, we'll begin with Daria. Daria, take it away.
Hi, everybody, and thank you for being here. So, today I want to talk about something that impacts all of us, whether we realize it or not, and that is the true cost of factory farming and aquaculture and how these industries threaten a sustainable future. So, each year, the US kills around 55 billion land and sea animals to meet our demand for food, and about 99% of those animals are raised on factory farms, which are industrial operations that prioritize efficiency and profit over basic animal welfare. Factory farming, which is also referred to as CAFOs, are facilities where animals are typically crammed into small spaces where they're unable to engage in natural behaviors. So, for example, chickens are typically kept in battery cages, pigs are kept in gestation crates, and calves are taken away from their mothers just days after birth. Fish in aquaculture operations, on the other hand, are confined to overcrowded pens that bear absolutely no resemblance to their natural habitats. And to keep animals alive in these conditions, producers rely heavily on painful mutilations and antibiotics that are not used to heal, but to prevent outbreaks before they even begin. The system isn't just cruel, it's dangerous. Factory farming has completely transformed US agriculture, and the small, peaceful family farms have been replaced with massive and industrialized systems that treat living beings as units of production. And this isn't limited to land animals. Fish farming in the United States now actually out produces wild fishing, with countless fish confined in ocean pens, and they are vulnerable to disease, escape, and pollution. So the environmental consequences of these industrial operations are absolutely devastating. So factory farming actually produces about 13% of US methane emissions, which is a powerful greenhouse gas that drives climate change. They consume over half of the nation's water supply and generate waste that pollutes drinking water and harms nearby communities in their areas. Similarly, aquaculture contributes to harmful algal blooms, the spread of disease to wild fish populations, and risks the introduction of invasive species into these fragile ecosystems. There is also a public health issue. With animals being so tightly packed together, disease is bound to spread rapidly. And to counter this, producers use antibiotics, but they're often used prophylactically, which only accelerates antibiotic resistance. The CDC has actually warned that 3 of every 4 new or emerging infectious diseases in people come from animals. And so, why does this matter? Because if we don't change course, the impacts will be irreversible. But we can change, and ending factory farming could save billions of animals each and every year, reduce pollution, slow down climate change, and protect public health. As my article states, Animal Equality has pointed out that by eliminating just industrial chicken farming and fishing, we would be able to save over 1.6 trillion fish and 66 billion chickens annually. So basically, what my article is getting at is that we have reached a tipping point. Factory farming is a relatively recent invention, but as we have seen and as my article states, the impacts are absolutely catastrophic and continuing to grow. So the longer we ignore it, the more damage it will do to animals, the environment, and also us people. So, overall, the call to action is that it's time to really rethink our food systems and shift towards one that is ethical, sustainable, and humane for the sake of all living beings and for the future of our planet. Thank you.
Daria, thank you very much. That was quite informative. As I mentioned, if you have any questions as we're going through these sessions, please put them in the Q&A and we will be addressing questions at the end. Next up to speak is Vanessa. Vanessa, take it away.
Thanks, Joan, and thanks, Daria. Hi, everybody. My name is Vanessa Kranz, and like Joan mentioned, I just graduated from Vermont Law and Graduate School, where I had the awesome opportunity to immerse myself in animal law through our Animal Law and Policy Institute. And so for this special 20th anniversary issue of the ABA Animal Law Committee newsletter, I wanted to reflect on how far we've come in legal education, because I think that's one of the clearest indicators of the progress that we've made as a movement. And like Joan mentioned, my article is titled Building a New Era of Advocacy, Animal Law's Expanding Role in Legal Education. So 20 years ago, animal law was a niche topic. I wasn't around in animal law 20 years ago. I was a freshman in high school, but I've talked to many people and I've done the research, and it was more of a one-off seminar or kind of just treated as a curiosity at law schools. But today it's become a foundational area of study with entire programs, degrees, and clinics devoted to it. And so this shift matters because the way we train future lawyers has a direct impact on the legal system and, of course, on animals themselves. So by building a strong academic infrastructure, we're not just educating students, but we're shaping the field of animal law, and we're influencing how animals will be protected for the generations to come. So over the past decade, especially, we've seen a major increase in dedicated animal law programs at law schools across the country. A few of the most established include Lewis and Clark Center for Animal Law Studies, Vermont Law's Animal Law and Policy Institute, and Harvard's Animal Law and Policy Program. And those are just a few. I have more in my article. There's a whole list. And more programs just continue to emerge. So for example, just last year, Cleveland State University launched the David H. Braff Animal Law Center. And these programs offer not just courses, but degree tracks, designated clinics, events, research opportunities, and they're also attracting support from major funders. And that growth is both student-driven and institutionally reinforced. And so beyond the core programs that we're seeing, we're also seeing more variety in the kinds of animal law courses being offered. So previously, there might just be kind of a broad animal law course. Now students can take courses focused on more narrow topics. So for example, wildlife, farmed animals, aquatic animals, undercover investigations, animal ethics, and more. And so this diversity really reflects how complex and interdisciplinary the field has become. And often these new courses are added because students are the ones who are advocating for them. So for example, ALDS student chapters have played a huge role in driving curriculum change. And we've also seen a major expansion in experiential learning. Just to name a few, clinics like Harvard's Animal Law and Policy Clinic, Vermont's Farmed Animal Advocacy Clinic, UConn's Animal Law Clinic, and GW's Access to Justice Clinic has an animal law division. And clinics like these give students hands-on experience in litigation, policy, and advocacy work. And that kind of real-world training is invaluable for launching careers in this field. Well, in the animal field. And I have personal experience. I got to be a clinician in our farmed animal advocacy program, so I can speak to how valuable those clinical trainings really are. And then on the degree side, more law schools are offering concentrations, certificates, LLM degrees, and even master's programs in animal law. And the master's programs are kind of, animal law adjacent. And many of these are now available remotely, which makes them even more accessible to students across the country and around the world. And I think COVID had something to do with that, but just making education more easier to access remotely. But it's been a really great positive. And I also want to highlight the critical role that ALDF plays in making all of this possible. The Animal Legal Defense Fund, I'm not sure if I said that, but ALDF is the Animal Legal Defense Fund, and they offer course grants, scholarships, and fellowships that help schools launch new courses and support students who want to go into animal law. And their support has made a real difference in how schools prioritize this field. And I've had experience with ALDF. I clerked with them my 2L summer. And then even before and after that, they're just such an amazing resource, and their staff are amazing mentors as well. And as I mentioned earlier, ALDF student chapters are often at the heart of changes. So from adding new courses to writing comments on agency rulemaking, to hosting events and volunteering at sanctuaries, students are not only learning, but they're also leading. And of course, there are still challenges like limited funding and competing academic priorities, but the progress over the past 20 years has been truly remarkable. Animal law is no longer a fringe topic. It's an established and growing discipline that's influencing public policy, industry practices, and the legal profession itself. And as interest in the field continues to rise, I believe that we're on the cusp of a new era, one where animal law is treated with the urgency, rigor, and respect it deserves in academia and beyond. Thank you.
Thank you, Vanessa. That was wonderful. Of course, as you all know, David and I both here on the panel are academics, and we're really excited to see this growth within the academy as well as within practice of animal law. So it's wonderful, and really appreciate your summary of that. Next, we turn to David Favor. David.
Thank you, Joan. My name's David Favor, a professor of law at Michigan State University and prior board member of the Animal Legal Defense Fund. And today I want to talk to you about an article that I wrote a number of years ago, and to check on how it's doing since I wrote it. I wrote an article called Living Property, which was a reference to how we might categorize animals within the legal world. Back in the 1990s, people in the few number of people in the animal world that were thinking about animals within the legal society, one position that came forward was that, well, since animals are property and property can't have rights, then a goal should be to eliminate animals as property. As a property professor for 25 years at that point, I found that to be a rather limiting view of the world, and that perhaps there were other things we could do, particularly in light of the fact that I did not think animals were going to be removed from the property status anytime soon. So I came up with an interim step to freedom from property, if you would, and that is living property. The idea that they can have aspects that make them still part of the property world, and at the same time, give them some forms of legal rights. I think that if we look at how things have moved in the past 20 years, that we see changes. Now, first of all, I'd like to take note of the fact that the wall between humans and animals was breached a considerable time ago in the legal field, and that's when the anti-cruelty laws first went into effect in the late 1860s and into the 1880s era in the United States. At that point, it was clear that it was the interest of the animal to be free from inappropriate pain and suffering that was the motivation and support for the new laws. And therefore, their interest, they did not receive a right, they received a protection. And it's a protection that no other property has because they're living property. How about that? That remained the strong focal point for a next century, if you would. And then we have seen a couple of changes. One of them started in the 1990s, and that was in the wills and trust area, one of the more conservative and clearly property-focused areas. Faced the reality that many of their clients who had some money said they wanted to leave some money for their companion animals to make sure their life continued to be good after they were no longer present. Well, at common law, it was clear you could not do that. You could not leave property to a property. But the really pretty far-thinking people in larger law firms that dealt with wealthy people and the desire to do it looked at each other and said, well, why can't we do this? And they came up with amendments to the Uniform Trust Law and Uniform Probate Law that specifically said you could have an animal trust. And what makes it really different is that there's 50 states and therefore 50 different sets of language. So sort of generalizing here, in all the ones I've looked at, there is a right for a third party to come in to enforce the trust if the trustee is violating the obligation that it holds to the animal to take care of the animal and take care of the funds on behalf of the animal. So there's an enforcement mechanism allowed within that. I think that's much stronger than the cruelty laws, acknowledgement that animals are within the framework of pieces of our legal system. The next one is much more recent, really the last 5 or 7 years, and I think COVID interrupted it, and so it hasn't exploded quite as much as I might have thought, and that is in the area of divorce. We have about 5 states, I believe now, that have amended their divorce law in the past 5 to 7 years. And it started with the state of Alaska, which I've just found sort of interesting, in which they say, and I'll read you now the language from the Alaska law, that a judge has the right to enter a final judgment for the ownership of or joint ownership of the animals, taking into consideration the well-being of the animal. Very close parallel to what they talk about in determining custody for a child. And that's because in the United States, clearly, companion animals have become members of the family. And therefore, the law wants to reflect that when it comes to, unfortunately, breaking up the family. And that they deserve, they're not a table, they're not a computer, they're a living creature who has relationships with other members of the family. And therefore, the law should take a look at that when it decides where the animal goes in a divorce. Notice also that the statute used the word well-being of the animal. That's I think, a relatively new phrase in the legal world, and it seeks to capture more than just animal welfare, which has to do primarily with the physical world for the animal, food, water, safety, disease-free. But animal well-being is a new phrase we're using to try to capture the mind of the animal, the emotion of the animal, and the thinking of the animal, and consider the wholeness of the animal, not just whether or not somebody's going to provide food and water. Now, I think that we'll see expanded consideration of that at the moment over the next few years. I think our national politics has sort of created a wall of stop for the immediate future for animals, because it just seems so hard to think about animals when there's so many other things that grab our attention. But remember that animal law is a state-focused law. It's not a federal law. There's no delegation to the federal government to deal with animals specifically. It has to be part of commerce or some other hook that's involved in it. So the property aspect of animals remains at the state law level. And so what I hope people will be looking to the future is how can we find small pieces of state law that can better reflect our relationship with animals and acknowledge the presence of the animals. One place where this might go is with our constitutional law, the state constitution, not the federal constitution. That's untouchable, I think. But there are states who are open to particularly changes by partition of the citizenry. And as such, I think we might see in the next 10 years, an attempt to expand animal rights and interest for animals in that area. And finally, there's a possibility of a treaty that may bring focus and consideration for animals on a global basis, which in turn will allow and provide more strength for animals within the domestic law of the United States or Canada or any of the other provisions. So that's my quick look. I think animal law as bringing out the idea of an animal having some rights, i.e. becoming living property, has gotten some traction, and I look forward to its future development. Joan, back to you.
David, thank you so much. Obviously, your work in this particular area, but in animal law generally, has just been so groundbreaking for decades. We really appreciate having you here on this panel and appreciate your time. Next up is Nancy Blaney to talk about speaking of animals, when lab animals are not deemed an animal. Take it away, Nancy.
Thank you, Joan. And hello, everybody. Thank you for coming. I wanted to talk to you, yes, a little sleight of hand here. When is a lab animal not an animal? Next slide, please. And that is just my contact info. So the law that we know as the Animal Welfare Act now started life as Laboratory Animal Welfare Act back in the 60s. And its purpose was to address conditions of lab animals while they were being used for research, and also to address the problem of pet theft by requiring the licensing of people who were selling animals for use in research. Protections were extended to, and mostly it covered just kind of dogs and cats at that time. In 1970, the law was expanded. It was changed to the Animal Welfare Act. Protections were extended to all warm-blooded animals at the time, and it covered only certain areas of commerce. So not only continued to cover research, but also, as you probably all know, breeders, dealers, exhibitors, carriers, and handlers. So for the most part, farm animals were left out of this unless they're used in research, because that's not what it was covering. And cold-blooded animals and fish were left out entirely of all of the coverage. Next slide, please. In 1971, though, USDA, in its infinite wisdom in implementing the 1970 law, declared that birds, rats, and mice were in fact not animals for purposes of the Animal Welfare Act, despite the clear intent of the 1970 amendments, which meant that these animals and cold-blooded animals continuing would not enjoy the further expanded protections of those amendments. Nor would they enjoy the further expanded protections under the 1985 amendments that, among other things, required the minimization of pain and distress. Next slide, please. The 1985 amendments also created the Animal Welfare Information Center, which is a great repository of information for researchers who are required to do alternatives research, looking into possible alternatives for their procedures utilizing animals. 1985 amendments also required the institution of the Institutional Animal Care and Use Committees, IACUCs, which are to include a community member, basically supposedly to represent the animal's interests on that committee, require the inspection of facilities, and also require investigators to consider alternatives. So again, birds, rats, and mice, and of course, continuing with cold-blooded animals, not included in those expanded protections. Next slide, please. So we're obviously the animal community is not going to stand by for that kind of nonsense. So in 1991, ALDF, which you have heard a number of times, the Humane Society of the U.S., which has since changed its name, all went to court versus the Secretary of Agriculture, Yoder, at the time. Next slide, please. In ruling on USDA's motion to dismiss, Judge Ritchie found that the plaintiffs had standing and that the court, and I do love this, the court found that the secretary was not necessarily acting within the discretionary authority delegated by Congress when he determined that birds, rats, and mice are not covered by the Federal Laboratory Animal Welfare Act. In fact, he said USDA's exclusions of birds, rats, and mice, as well as the denial of the petition, was arbitrary, capricious, and violates the law. So this is great. This was the ruling on the motion to dismiss, and then in 1992, in a hearing on the case itself, Judge Ritchie granted the plaintiff's request for summary judgment. Next slide, please. That did not last long. In 1994, unfortunately, the appeals court for DC reversed, ruling that the plaintiffs did not, in fact, have standing. Next slide, please. Now, at this time, I just want to interject a reference to the Public Health Service policy on humane care and use of laboratory animals, because it can be a little confusing that, well, we have the Animal Welfare Act, we have this policy, so what is the difference? The policy, in fact, is a bit more broad in its coverage in that it covers all vertebrate animals. However, it does not have the force of law and does not involve inspections by VMOs or anybody in USDA, and therefore there's really no public record of those inspections. And those are key components for us to know what's going on in laboratories. Next slide, please. Okay, so we're obviously not going to let the 1992 reversal stand in our way, or the 94 reversal. So the Alternatives Research and Development Foundation went to court again in 99. And at that time, they were relying on an appeals opinion from an unrelated case, but that had expanded grounds for standing to include injuries to one's aesthetic interest in observing animals living in inhumane conditions. So with that, armed with that, they did have a plaintiff who was declared to have standing in that case. And that particular case had to do with the psychological enrichment for primates. Next slide, please. So in the new Animal Alternatives Research Development Foundation case, Judge Hoovel rejected USDA's argument that plaintiffs didn't have standing, and once again, that the Secretary's discretion to exclude certain animals from the Act is committed by law to his discretion and is not subject to judicial review. She rejected that idea. NABUR, National Association for Biomedical Research, and Johns Hopkins University also filed motions to intervene, but USDA settled the case and agreed to begin the process of extending Animal Welfare Act coverage to birds, rats, and mice. Yay! Okay, we've gotten what we want, a win. Next slide, please. Yeah, not so fast. The rug gets pulled out from under them. As you may all have heard about, the notorious Helms Amendment to a farm bill, once again, was not a regulatory statement, but in this case was a statutory move to take birds, rats, and mice out of the definition of animal right in the statute. However, it wasn't put together quite as well as they thought it should have been. And so thanks to a comma issue, they didn't capture everybody. So they thought they had captured all the birds, all the rats, all of the mice as just not being covered by anything under the Animal Welfare Act. That turned out not to be the case. Some birds, some rats, some mice were in fact still included, and particularly for birds, while they were excluded from research, they were still to be regulated as in the pet trade. Next slide, please. So the regulation that came out, which is a little bit beyond the scope of this talk, but the scope that came out for birds in the pet trade really was quite awful. It has so many exemptions that it excludes almost all birds that are in the pet trade. So that is something that we're still working on. Do we want to try to change the regulation? Do we want to try to expand it back to, and do something about getting birds covered in research? Not right now, as you all may know, regulations are subject to congressional resolutions of disapproval. So once that happens, if a regulation gets disapproved that way, you cannot come back with another regulation. But in the meantime, legislation has been introduced, the Cold-Blooded Animal Research and Exhibition Act. Congresswoman McCollum has introduced this to extend coverage to cold-blooded animals. So we are working on that and waiting to see where that goes. In current climate, probably not too far, but we're laying the groundwork because we know these things can take a very long time. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Nancy. That was great, and I appreciate all the work that you do in this area. All right, we're now going to be switching gears here a bit, focusing on wolf reintroduction and turning it over to Courtney. Courtney, take it away.
Thank you, Joan, and thank you, Nancy. I'm going to talk to you about wolf reintroduction in Colorado, or more specifically about the divisions between pro-wolf advocates. Next slide, please. In November 2020, the voters of Colorado voted to restore the gray wolf to the state. This marks the first time an election in any state mandated the restoration of an endangered species. Through the passage of Ballot Initiative 114, the voters of Colorado directed the Colorado Parks and Wildlife Commission to develop a plan to restore and manage gray wolves in Colorado, west of the Continental Divide, no later than December 31st, 2023. In May 2023, the Commission released the Colorado Wolf Restoration and Management Plan with the primary goal of reestablishing and maintaining a viable, self-sustaining wolf population in Colorado. The plan provides for the transfer of 30 to 50 wolves over a 3 to 5 year period of time, 10 to 15 gray wolves per year. However, it also includes a lethal management option. In November 2023, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service finalized a rule establishing a non-essential experimental population of wolves in Colorado gray wolves in Colorado under Section 10J of the Endangered Species Act. It provides for allowable, legal, purposeful, and incidental take of gray wolves. The lethal management option is the center point of the debate between pro-wolf advocates, but I'll come back to that in a moment. According to the plan, prior to relocation, veterans and biologists conduct a general health assessment to determine suitability for translocation. Notably absent is any consideration of whether the individual wolf is suited for translocation. Instead, Colorado Parks and Wildlife, or CPW, recommends sourcing donor populations based on animal reputation or known history of chronic depredation. Next slide, please. In December 2023, the first 10 gray wolves were captured from eastern Oregon and released to remote areas of western Colorado. By June 2024, the first family had formed, now known as the Copper Creek Pack, a mother, a father, and 5 pups. In August and September 2024, the breeding pair and 4 of the 5 pups were captured and sent to a holding facility after reports of livestock depredation. The father later died of an existing gunshot wound. In January 2025, the second group of 15 wolves were captured from British Columbia, Canada, and released to remote areas in western Colorado. And separately, the agency also released the 5 members of the Copper Creek Pack, the mother and 4 of her cubs. No further releases are planned until next season. CPW is currently monitoring 4 potential dens for pups born this year, but the number of pups is unknown. Next slide, please. And there should be a map here, but it's not here. I don't know why. But I can just speak to it basically. It's going to be the map depicts, if it were shown, watersheds where collared wolves in Colorado were observed. There's an area that indicates wolf activity in the watershed. And just quickly, if you're not familiar with Colorado, Wyoming is to the north, Utah is to the west, Arizona is sort of kitty corner, and to the south is New Mexico. And basically, wolves have been observed in close to all of the borders outside of the eastern border as they continue to expand their territory along the western slope, which is the area west of the Rocky Mountains. Wolves have also been observed just west of Metro Denver near Boulder, and one was recently observed just northeast of Durango in southwest Colorado, which is where I live. Importantly, any wolves that wander into Utah, New Mexico, or Arizona will be retrieved and brought back to Colorado under existing agreements. But Colorado does not have a similar agreement with Wyoming. Next slide, please. So 9 wolves have died since reintroduction efforts began. 25 wolves were reintroduced. 8 of them have died or were killed. And a 9th one, a pup from the Copper Creek Pack, was recently killed by Colorado Parks and Wildlife. So 2 of the wolves were killed in Wyoming after they crossed over the border. One was shot by Wildlife Services, and the other one was legally hunted, or so they believe. So in Colorado, there were 3 confirmed deaths in 2024 and 4 confirmed deaths in 2025. Next slide, please. So when I first started this article, I looked at this sort of a rights versus welfare issue, meaning the disagreement was primarily between advocates who focus on the species as a whole and advocates who are more focused on the welfare of individual animals. But what I learned is that it's not quite that straightforward. So just to rewind a little bit, I want to talk about compassionate conservation. Compassionate conservation is based on the ethical position that actions taken to protect biodiversity should be guided by compassion for all sentient beings. The 4 guiding principles are do no harm, individuals matter, value all wildlife, and peaceful coexistence. And again, what I learned while researching this article is that wolf advocates tend to position themselves under these principles despite fundamental disagreements, primarily lethal management, but more generally, whether we should be removing wolves from their homes and families, bringing them to Colorado with no guarantee of survival. On one hand, some wolf advocates argue that keystone species like the gray wolf must be restored by any means, even if those efforts could result in harm or even death to the individual animals. Advocates like wildlife biologist Dr. Joanna Lambert, co-founder of the Rocky Mountain Wolf Project, who fought really hard to get this on the ballot, argues that Colorado wolf reintroduction would have been a non-starter without the lethal option. Dr. Lambert sees the 10J rule as an important compromise among stakeholders. On the other hand, others argue that the life of every single individual matters and every life should matter to us. For example, wildlife biologist Dr. Mark Beckoff supports wolf reintroduction, but he does not support what he calls the dump and pray strategy of removing wolves from one area, placing them in an unfamiliar area, and then praying they survive. But what is most important is that most, if not all, pro-wolf advocates agree that coexistence is possible. And each and every one of us supports and encourages non-lethal methods of management. No one wants to see any wolves die. But for wolf reintroduction to succeed, livestock producers need to rely on non-lethal management methods. Next slide, please. Just really quickly, I wanted to show you some non-lethal management methods that CPW includes in their wolf resource guides. They have some really great conflict minimization tools. One of the interesting ones for me, anyhow, and one of the newer ones are range riders. And these are men and women who are trained to sort of ride around the range and, keep their eyes on range health and keep their eyes on, any potential, wolf or carnivore livestock interactions. Next slide, please. So to conclude, while divisions amongst pro-wolf advocates exist, they are not insurmountable. Even if this debate seemingly boils down to ideology versus practicality, finding common ground is crucial because without it, Colorado's wolf reintroduction will fail. Rewilding does not require killing animals, and compromise does not mandate lethal management. Coexistence is possible. Thanks.
Courtney, thank you so much. That is obviously a very important topic, and there's been a lot of discussion, I think, in the media generally around wolves recently. So super timely as well. Thank you. And finally, we're ending with Holly, who's going to be focusing a bit on the Animal Law Committee and the policy work that we've done over the intervening 20 years since we started 20 years ago. So Holly, take it away. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, Joan, and thanks, Courtney. Hi, everybody. It's great to be here. For our newsletter celebrating 20 years of the ABA's Animal Law Committee, I wrote about what I believe to be a powerful tool for change within animal law, which is the ABA resolution. So today we'll briefly discuss what an ABA resolution is and why it's important, the Animal Law Committee's history and strategy of drafting and advocating for resolutions over these past 20 years, and finally, the real-world impact these policies have once passed. A quick note, we won't be doing a deep dive into the entire formal process of drafting resolutions and getting them passed, but last week I did actually co-host a webinar on that exact topic with ALC Chair Molly Armis and former Chair Alex Sarusi. So if you're interested, I'd be happy to share a recording of that webinar if you email me today after today's presentation. So before we dive in, I just want to quickly thank Molly, who sparked the initial idea for my article. I also wanted to thank the other individuals listed here, Alex, Letty, Joan, Chris, Megan, and Monica, for sharing with me their experience drafting and advocating for ABA policies on behalf of the ALC. So their guidance really helped me form the backbone of this article. It was my primary form of research. Next slide, please. So let's get started with what an ABA resolution is. Just very briefly, it's an official policy statement declaring the ABA's stance on a wide variety of legislative issues and issues impacting the legal profession. So this includes everything from legal ethics to legal education standards to criminal justice reform. And those policies, once passed, they become the official position of the entire ABA. So when the Animal Law Committee gets a resolution passed, it's no longer just the Animal Law Committee's opinion. It becomes a statement from the leading association of legal professionals in the country. And while these resolutions don't carry the weight of law, they can be really powerful advocacy tools for advocates and policymakers at all levels of government to push for changes to laws, regulations, and even corporate policies. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, we're not going to be going deep into the formal process, but I did want to give you a very quick bird's eye view of the journey a resolution takes. It starts with an idea from an individual or group, and after discussing it with the Animal Law Committee leadership, that individual or individuals will draft a resolution and accompanying report, typically within one of our substantive subcommittees. During that process, the broader Animal Law Committee will provide any necessary support throughout the process and vote on the draft resolution and report. And then it will be voted on by our TIPS Council. And if TIPS chooses to sponsor the resolution, it proceeds to the House of Delegates, which is the ABA's policymaking body. The House of Delegates has nearly 600 delegates that represent different geographic areas and legal practice areas. And the House meets twice a year to vote on resolutions, which, if they get passed, get adopted as official ABA policy. So it's quite a journey from a single idea to the unified voice of the entire ABA. Next slide, please. To date, the ABA's House of Delegates has passed 16 resolutions related to animal protection that have been sponsored or co-sponsored by TIPS. And the scope of these resolutions is impressive. We don't have time to go through all 16, but we've helped pass resolutions covering everything from allowing specially trained dogs to assist victims and witnesses participating in the criminal justice system, to promoting the replacement, refinement, and reduction of animal use in testing, to banning the possession and import of most dangerous wild animals. And as you can see from the screenshot on the slide, the full list is accessible on the TIPS website, and I have the link included there. I really encourage you to check them out. Next slide, please. So with so many potential issues impacting animal well-being, how does the ALC decide where to focus its energy? So first and foremost, we're looking for the intersections. We prioritize issues where helping animals also benefits people, whether that's enhancing public health or safeguarding the environment. And this approach helps us build coalitions and demonstrates that animal law issues have an incredibly wide reach. So, for example, when developing a resolution on breed-neutral discrimination laws, the ALC chose to focus on emphasizing the fact that breed discrimination, in our opinion, violates property rights and constitutional due process, instead of focusing solely on the well-being of dogs. And second, we want to ensure that we're complementing the policy priorities of animal advocacy organizations, because an ABA policy can help boost the advocacy efforts of groups who are putting in the work to get a local ordinance or a state law passed. And third, we're looking for proven solutions. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. Sometimes we can scale up what has already been demonstrated to work, and that can be really persuasive evidence to get a policy passed. So, for example, after Texas passed a law in 2015 requiring animal encounter training for police, the number of dogs shot by officers fell by 90% in 4 years in Texas. So this gave the ALC the proof of concept that it needed to advocate for a similar ABA policy on the national level. Fourth, we're exploring areas that are subject to patchwork legislation or regulation. An ABA policy can help promote more consistent treatment of animals across jurisdictions. And finally, sometimes the ALC promotes a new policy after a particularly high-profile event that highlights a critical gap in the law. So, for instance, after Hurricane Katrina, almost exactly 20 years ago, many pets were displaced and shelters lacked guidelines on how and when animals could be adopted out. So this actually led to the ABA adopting a model policy on caring for animals in disasters. Next slide, please. So once our committee selects a topic and begins to draft the resolution, we face the challenge of advocating for it within the ABA to gain buy-in. And this internal advocacy really boils down to two key tactics. First, we build alliances by actively seeking co-sponsorship from other ABA sections, which demonstrates to the ABA that animal law isn't a silo. It's deeply interconnected with other fields. A perfect example was our recent resolution on protecting companion animals in family law and protection order proceedings. We collaborated with the family law section and the Commission on Domestic and Sexual Violence. And their partnership was really essential in showing that this is a human issue in addition to an animal issue, which I think was a key reason for its success. And then second, we have to find common ground. So obviously we're, animal advocates and lawyers. We want to protect animals, but a resolution should also be framed in a way that a very diverse House of Delegates can support. And this was a powerful lesson when we were attempting to get a resolution passed on disaster preparedness for farmed animals. So our first draft recommended requiring farmers to prepare for natural disasters in order to qualify for federal animal loss payments from the federal government. But delegates from agricultural states felt it was too burdensome for farmers, so that was voted down. We went back to the drawing board, and the new version actually removed that requirement and instead urged the government to offer disaster preparedness training to farmers. And that was a critical change that helped us build consensus, and the updated resolution passed. Next slide. So once the House of Delegates adopts a policy, what comes next? So at the federal level, the ABA's Governmental Affairs Office takes the lead and advocates directly to Congress and federal agencies. However, the GAO does not advocate at the local or state level, so our committee's Policy and Alliances Subcommittee was formed to fill that gap. We reach out to state and local bar associations and encourage them to take up animal law issues and conduct outreach within their state and local governments, now with the backing of an official ABA policy. And finally, other animal protection organizations can use our resolutions to lend serious weight to their own advocacy. So a great example is from this year in Missouri, when the Animal Legal Defense Fund used an ABA resolution to support a new bill requiring animal encounter training for police. And this is the ultimate goal. When we get a policy passed, it's not just, the animal law people who are advocating for it, it's the entire legal profession. And this gives the policy a certain legitimacy that can really help to catalyze real policy change. Next slide, please. So as we wrap up, over the last 20 years, the Animal Law Committee has made really incredible strides with policymaking within the ABA. It might not always be the top policy priority for many delegates, and nor is it a major focus of the ABA's federal lobbying efforts because they have a really wide legislative and policy advocacy mandate. But our work continues, and the progress that we've made here is a direct result of dedicated advocates pushing these issues forward, and we need to keep the momentum going. So if this discussion sparked an idea and you're interested in proposing a topic for a future resolution, please reach out to our ALC leadership, Molly Armis and James Giswaldi. And if you want to help us drive change at the state and local levels, we'd love to have you join our Policy and Alliances subcommittee. Myself, along with Rebecca Kritzer, will be taking over chairing the Policy and Alliances subcommittee from Molly and Alex this August. So please feel free to contact any and all of us at this point. And that's it from me.
Fabulous. Thank you so much. Well, first, before we turn to any questions, I just want to thank our spectacular panelists. This was obviously, we covered such a wide range of really fascinating topics, and each and every presentation was just wonderful. And I also want a special thanks to Jason Billups, who is with us today as our TIP staff. And he's been helping us on the tech side here. And of course, all of the staff, the TIP staff, are always so supportive of our Animal Law Committee and the work that we do. So I really want a huge shout out to all of them as well. Okay, we don't have a whole lot of questions in the Q&A. I think maybe we have one. Oh, yeah. I see Maria has asked a few questions, and yes, please do get acquainted, come to our meetings. We meet on the second Friday of each month, the Animal Law Committee, at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. And if you have any questions about that, you can feel free to reach out to any of the folks on Holly's slide that was just there, or to me. I do want to say, though, we have we can maybe chat for just a few more minutes about the topics here. And I'd like to turn to Vanessa. Vanessa said she has a question for Courtney.
Yeah, Courtney, I'm not sure if you know the answer to this, but I was just wondering if we compare the Colorado reintroduction of the gray wolves to the Yellowstone reintroduction, did Yellowstone see the deaths that Colorado is seeing, or do you not know? Because it just seems like a lot of wolves died very quickly.
Agreed. And I can't answer that specifically, honestly, but I can tell you that things haven't gone as well here. I mean, keeping in mind that in Colorado, the wolves are being put in areas where not necessarily everybody wants them. Yellowstone was a much broader area with a lot more, not as many people ranching, not as many people, with so much at stake. You know what I mean? That could lose their entire livelihood, or whatever, as they say. But so I can't answer you specifically, but what I can say is that yes, this has not gone as they planned. However, the leadership at the officials at Colorado Parks and Wildlife, they do say that they didn't, and this kind of irritates me, they didn't plan for any of the wolves to survive. They thought that most of them would die. So everything's going as planned. And it's like, wait, that doesn't seem to mesh with the way, with what we voted for, I suppose you could say. But thank you for your question. I wish I could give you a more specific answer, but it is a much different introduction effort. Thank you.
Thanks, Courtney. Wow, that is really hard to hear that that's what their expectation was. Because I was thinking, yeah, did they work, with the local folks that they knew may create problems beforehand to try to work out ways in which they were going to,
I think organizations worked with the people, and they still are. I mean, there's some really amazing efforts out there right now trying to work with the livestock producers and trying to make this go better, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think Rocky Mountain Wolf Project has done an amazing job. We have this really great license plate here in Colorado right now where the money that they collect from that is going to these attempts at training ranchers for non-lethal. But, in my opinion, I think anybody would agree that's here, that should have been done before we started bringing them back to the state. You know what I mean? Because this has gone not as planned, but I still think it could go well. Thank you.
Thank you. David, I'll ask you a quick question. I know, this whole concept of living property and the like has has been around for a while since you introduced it. Lots of folks are sort of talking about different ways of doing it. And the examples, of course, that you gave were all within the companion animal context. And so I'm curious if you might have some thoughts as to whether that concept might move beyond the companion animal context, maybe into wildlife or maybe into other domestic animals, or that maybe that requires more than a couple of minutes, but I'm just curious what your thoughts are on that.
Well, two categories talk about wildlife.
Yes.
I think we have to have a slightly different door to go through. But a number of people have brought forth ideas on the concept of trust for wildlife and getting management away from a government agency and into people whose only focus is animals within the wild and trying to promote their well-being. So there is clearly a path forward there. South America, this sounds crazy, but South America is actually cutting the pathway forward for thinking about this with their new laws. For the one group that we all care the most about and don't seem to be able to do very much about, of course, are the agricultural animals. And I think an important step forward is Prop 12 from California, and that's bringing the interest of the protections of the cruelty laws as being more and more refined for the animals purpose of California out to the other states where the animals don't have that. And assuming that we dodge the bullet of federal law that trumps Prop 12, then I think if we can get more states to adopt Prop 12, we will be moving towards something that's a better world for agricultural animals.
Thank you. Jim has, David, put you on the spot here a little bit. He said, given your long-term perspective as a thought leader in the field, do you have any reflections on the mix of contributions presented here today, especially from the many young authors? As you know, both Vanessa and Daria just graduated from Vermont Law School. What does that sort of suggest, I guess, about where we are as an animal law community from a scholar perspective and from a practitioner perspective?
It suggests a great diversity of thought, which is what we need. We don't want people just saying what other people have already said, because it's going to take a general assault on the legal field, and nobody knows exactly what's going to be a breakthrough point or when that might happen. But the more people we have involved in the legal field, and particularly, I think teachers are an important part of this, the ABA committee is an important part of this, then something's going to happen that's going to allow us to take the message to a broader point. To be a really good example of this was the Life magazine coverage of animal testing, stolen dogs used in animal testing in the 1960s, which became the public cry for regulation that became the Animal Welfare Act. And we don't know when something like that might happen that again captures the public interest and gives us political leverage to actually make something happen. So you're right. I mean, when we started, we could put everybody we knew in one room that was dealing with animal law, and now it's global. It's extraordinarily global, and that is just I don't even know how to keep my hands on that anymore. I keep hearing things happening here and things happening there, and there's so much energy, positive energy out there that I know good things are going to happen.
Thank you so much. So Devin has a question. She said, as the Policy and Alliance Subcommittee worked on efforts relating to wildlife crossings? Devin, I can answer that and say, no, we haven't. But going to Holly's point, I think I can speak on behalf of everyone on the leadership of the Animal Law Committee. We are very open, as Holly said, to ideas that folks have with respect to drafting and proposing resolutions to the ABA House of Delegates. So if you have an idea for wildlife crossings, get in touch with Holly and Rebecca, I think, who will be taking over. I know Molly and Alex, we're in August, we'll be shifting over, but I'm sure they'll be happy to chat with you about how we might work on that. And then Maria, publicity of crush videos. I'm not sure what those messages are about, but yeah, I'm sorry, I'm not quite sure if that's a question, but certainly those are problematic issues. that we worry about. But we are out of time. We've got 1 minute left. And I want to again thank our fabulous authors and panelists. This is a great way to sort of take the publication work that we do. We have a newsletter that's published 3 times a year, and we have fabulous articles. And I think I can say that we will probably be doing this again. It was nice that we kicked off our Behind the Pages sort of series now with our 20th anniversary issue. But we've certainly come a long way, both the newsletter and the Animal Law Committee together in 20 years. And I know that over the next 20 years, we're going to be in even greater, doing so much more wonderful work as we move forward, especially with all of our newer members that are joining us, like Vanessa and Daria coming out of our law schools and going into practice to work on animal law. So thank you all again. And like I said, you will be receiving the recording via email later this week. Bye-bye.